Okay, so good evening, everyone that has joined the call. Thank you all so much for joining. My name's Grace, and I'm one of the four candidates that you're going to be hearing from this evening, and I'm also chairing the event. And we're here to talk about the Young Labour National Committee elections for the equalities officers. This is the first time in a number of years that these positions have been elected for, due to a number of issues with voting. And so the four of us are all really excited to be standing for these positions and to ensure that liberation is firmly on the agenda for the Young Labour National Committee. We're going to hear from myself and the three other candidates a little bit about why we're standing, but we're also really excited to be joined by Ribeiro-Addy and Lavery this evening as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass over to Belle first of all, who's going to talk a little bit for us about why these elections matter and why they're kind of so important this year. So I'll hand over to Belle if that's okay.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'm really, really pleased to be supporting Socialist future candidates. And yes, absolutely, these elections matter first and foremost because of democracy. It's just plain wrong that there haven't been the means to overcome all of the things that have prevented from these elections from being electable in the past. We are a Labour Party that is meant to be built on the idea of democracy. So the fact that that hasn't happened is quite bad. But the fact that it is happening now is momentous, and it's clear that it is important, particularly given the climate that we're in at the moment. We're in a situation where young people are so important, particularly to issues of liberation, particularly to issues of equality, because we all know that there are much better attitudes amongst our young people. But whilst we have that situation where there are better attitudes amongst young people, where young people are more tolerant than we've ever seen, we also have a situation where we're seeing a major backlash from governments right across the world. A rise in fascist governments right across the world, a rise in people really, really standing up against equality as opposed to hoping to move it forward. And basically, it's so important that we have young people centrally involved in these matters, because they're actually going to be informing what is the future. And I think that we need every single resource we can to fight against this really horrible backlash. And to be quite frank, that's even within our own party. Our own party has definitely had issues over the years, since before we left government, but certainly after. I think a lot of that has been built off the pressure of trying to be what they felt was electable to the rest of the country. And so just with the wave of fascist movements moving right across Europe, and we've seen Trump in the US, and how all of that has played out. We've seen a situation where at times we've tried to out-Tory the Tories. I think that's really poor when we think of the fact that the Labour Party is a socialist democratic party, a party that is meant to be built on issues of equality. And I know at times, when people are talking about the working class, they're not thinking about equality overall, but equality struggles are working class struggles. When we think about who the working classes are, who is more likely to be in a less fortunate situation, who is most likely to be in a worse socioeconomic situation, there's complete intersectionality with all underrepresented and discriminated against groups. So the idea that the Labour Party wouldn't always be front and centre when it comes to those struggles is wrong. And I think it has been a worry where we've seen us attempt to catch up at times with different parties in terms of their rhetoric, or to appear more mainstream or centrist, or whatever we want to call it, will actually stop ourselves from saying what are the important things. We need to be very, very careful about that. We've been talking quite a lot about the red wall, about electability, and all of these different things, and making sure we can win at the next general election. But unfortunately, again, looking back at what I said earlier about attempting to out-Tory the Tories, at times we get it wrong. So I think about the 2015 elections where we lost. We lost in a way that we had thought by that time we would have been able to get things back. And the idea was that after those elections, that what we would do is attempt to change our rhetoric, attempt to change our language into what we thought that people would appreciate. We attempted to out-Tory the Tories, and we had disgraceful things like those immigration mugs, those control on immigration mugs, which we thought were so popular, because the idea was that the reason why we didn't win those elections because we weren't tough enough on immigration. Well, actually, the reason why we didn't win those elections is because we lost Scotland. We lost Scotland, where there, quite a large chunk of seats. Without being able to win in Scotland, we would find it very, very difficult to form a government in this country. And that was really sad, because the Scottish people were actually a large voting base for us. They would vote Labour every single time, without question, whether or not we made mistakes. They would do it. And then one year they just changed, and that completely changed the face of Parliament. It changed our chances. And instead, we were saying that the reason why was because we weren't tough enough on immigration. And I make that point about the Scottish vote because we have many other large voting bases, voting groups that would usually vote for Labour. We have Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. We have Muslim communities that would usually vote. We have LGBT communities. All of these different groups that would usually vote for Labour. And if we continue to take them for granted in terms of policy, in terms of what we speak out on, we will soon find quite easily that these groups could fall away, because there are other options. There are other parties, regardless of whether they're expected to actually win elections. There are other options for them. We cannot continue to take them for granted. I think about different things that have occurred over the past year to 2 years, where major movements have risen up. We think about what's happened with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think of where people have not at times felt represented by the Labour Party. It's a massive issue. If when the Labour Party is meant to be that party of equality, that party that's always been on the right side of history in terms of pushing forward legislation, is not always fighting for underrepresented groups, then we actually lose our identity, we lose our character. And for those who are just looking at numbers, we lose our vote. So whether we're appealing to the Red Wall or appealing to other places, there are many different types of Labour heartland. We have to stay true to our values. And I think it's wrong for us to reduce people in certain areas to being, I don't know, really not progressive on certain issues. I think that's wrong. In every single area, you will find underrepresented groups. And actually, when it comes down to it, certainly not in terms of power, but in terms of numbers, underrepresented groups eventually make up the numbers. And if people do not feel like Labour are representing them properly on all of these issues, of course they are going to go away. So it's so key. It's so key we're listening to younger people. It's so key that we have those elements within our party, be it through London Young Labour, be it through various different groups in the party that really want to hold on to those core socialist values, aren't willing to move away from them for electoral gain, and will always provide that voice and that home for people in the Labour Party that truly want to stand up for everybody. And that's why I'm so proud to represent and support, proud to support rather, the Socialist future candidates, because I believe that they will represent the very best of those values. They will not be entering a race to the bottom. They'll be very, very clear about what the future of our party should look like, what the future of our party should fight for, and what the future of our party should never, ever stray away from. And we couldn't hope for better. So I'm really pleased to be with all of you today. I hope everybody makes sure that they get behind these amazing candidates. You'll be hearing from them very, very soon. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Belle. And yeah, it is so important that we are just out-Torying the Tories, and that we are kind of facilitating liberation and holding the party to account. I think that's really, really important. But we're going to go to Tor Robinson now, who is our candidate for Young Labour LGBT plus officer. And they're going to talk a little bit about why they're standing, why you should vote for them, and what they want to do on committee.
Thanks, Grace. So firstly, I'll just say that was really important, Belle, especially on kind of talking about how we really can't work to out-Tory the Tories and how it's only damaging to our future, not only as a progressive movement, but as a political party that seeks to win elections. We really can't take these votes for granted anymore. And I suppose I want to speak a bit about that now. So I guess I'll start by saying that, as I have many times, I still have great faith in what the Labour Party could be and what the party should be. But right now, it isn't the party that young people need. And it's increasingly unclear if it is even a force for good at all in the lives of young LGBT plus people. And this has to change because today, young people in our community, particularly young trans people, are confronting a future in Britain that is ever more terrifying. Every week, the national news media renews their attack on us, printing article after article, attacking our community, spreading hatred without any route to equitable reply or rebuttal. And the government works hand in glove to legitimize these attacks. We saw the result of this when the Gender Recognition Act reform was effectively cancelled. And at the time, we were even threatened with the worst outcome of the total withdrawal of our rights. And at the heart of this culture war on us is a contention that LGBT plus people and all minorities want more than others have. And that in a society ruled by the logic of austerity, there's only so much to go around. If we have what we need, everyone else will have less of what they need. But what is it that we need? We need life-saving healthcare, like PrEP, and transition-related care, both of which are effectively inaccessible now for most people. We need secure employment, where we aren't threatened by the bigotry of our employers, and which pays enough to live a decent life. We need housing, where we're safe from hatred and not forced to pay a premium just for that privilege. And we need rights that give us the freedom to live our lives without fear. Healthcare, decent work, housing and equality are not special interests. These are the same things that everybody needs. And that is the fact which the Labour Party should be stating clearly. But when young LGBT plus people look at politics today, we do not see a party which is on our side. What we see instead is a party that calculates everything to the political culture the Tories feed on. Where there should be a party that treats us with respect, instead we see a party where bigotry is welcomed into the highest echelons. Where we hope Labour would be the political refuge we desperately seek, instead we see a party where young LGBT plus people are afraid to go to their CLPs due to the hatred they might face, and where MPs belittle and demean young LGBT plus members. Where we need a party that pushes back against the lies of the Tories and their right-wing press, instead we see a party that works to ingratiate itself with those same hate-mongers, rather than empower those they endanger. So for those who wonder why so many young LGBT plus people, especially trans people, have been leaving this party, these are the reasons why. We know who the Tories are, and we aren't surprised to know that they hate us. But to feel that Labour does too is heartbreaking. And if there's anything more terrifying than a governing party that furthers bigotry, it is the knowledge that the opposition may feel the same way. For young LGBT plus people, it's all too easy to become hopeless about our future when we face the prospect of fighting back against that hatred entirely alone. But that's the reason why these elections are so important. They're an opportunity to show that we aren't alone, and that together we can create the party that we need Labour to be. By standing together, we can fight for all those who are up against it in our society. The solidarity displayed at events like this is the greatest weapon that we have against those who attempt to divide us. We can fight the lie that we all live in competition just by working together against it. With Young Labour, we can take that further through political education for those young members who are the future of Labour, giving our members the knowledge and skills needed not only to understand the danger we face, but to organise against it. Armed with those skills, we in Young Labour can build that collective power through stronger and more widely accessible local groups, with networks of LGBT plus members that allow us to communicate and campaign, and which give us a voice of our own to speak out against the status quo in this party. With that voice, we can ensure that demands like an internal code of conduct against LGBT plus bigotry can't be ignored any longer. We can also begin to transform our lives outside the party. By building links with the trade unions and young LGBT plus members, we can create the power in the workplace we need to stop the exploitation that forces us to the margins of our society. We must also find ways to work alongside LGBT plus community groups, as well as organizations like ACORN, in order to build the broad coalition needed both within and across our communities to give us the power to fight outside of Westminster, as well as within. These, I believe, are the urgent tasks that Young Labour, and particularly its equalities officers, face today. I think it's easy to dismiss elections like this in the Labour Party, but the truth is that we are at a critical moment, not only for the future of LGBT plus people, but of everyone who is now staring into the abyss. If we want to change that, then we must act now. And through Young Labour, I think we can light the fire that is needed to sort of change our future from the darkness that we currently face. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I know the work you've already done as like an activist to hold the party to account on these issues has been amazing. So like hopefully once you're on Young Labour National Committee, like we can do some amazing stuff to try and hold the party to account and get some change as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass over now to Aisha Malik-Smith, who is our candidate for Disabled Members Officer, and she's going to chat to you a little bit about why she's standing.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, it's amazing. And it was wonderful to hear from Tor there. But I'm here today because I believe that disabled people's rights must be core to the Labour movement. From the systemic barriers that we face in the workplace and in education, to endless mental health waiting lists, to a broken and cruel welfare system, the issues that affect us as young disabled people have festered, quite frankly, unchallenged in this country for too long. The key principle that we have in the disabled people's movement is nothing about us without us. And this must be embedded in the party and in Labour in government. Disabled people have known about the cruelty and incompetency of the Tories for decades. Rampant and rabid austerity claimed the lives of disabled people long before COVID started killing us. The United Nations condemned the government for its treatment of disabled people years ago. This pandemic has only exposed the eugenics that underpins so much of Conservative ideology, with the Tory government overseeing 128,000 needless deaths, 60% of which are those of disabled people. And we've got a failed social security system that leaves out of work disabled people living a hand-to-mouth existence on universal credit. One of the things that first politicised me was seeing my mum fall into a very similar benefits trap as in the film I, Daniel Blake, where she was too unwell for job seekers allowance, but too well for disability allowance. And quite frankly, it's clear that the benefit system fails disabled people. It's punitive. There have been thousands of lives lost because of it. And it has to stop, really. We see in social care a system that dehumanizes and objectifies disabled people, stripping us of our dignity and autonomy. And it doesn't work for the care workers either, who are left to do incredibly difficult jobs under time constraints that no one can provide dignity to a disabled person in that sort of work environment. It's just not possible. We have housing that's inaccessible, even if we could afford it. Employers fail to make accommodations for us. Education either segregates us or completely fails to support us. With transport, we see our needs are so intertwined with that of the Labour movement that you see the RMT's campaign to keep the guard on the train. Well, disabled people need the guard on the train. We need to be able to get on and off trains. And quite frankly, that's where I think we see that disabled people's rights and needs intersect so clearly with the needs of working people. And 20 to 25% of the working age population is disabled. We are the workers. And you can see when you look at Parliament, only a handful of the 650 MPs identify as disabled, nowhere near proportionately. And it's clear in the policies they enact that they don't understand the issues we face. And as you know, 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of the population, I think that's disgraceful. I'm standing for Disabled Members Officer to ensure that disabled people are at the heart of the policy issues that affect us, that we're able to self-organise, and that we have access to all levels of the party. We need to be seeing political education events on the history of the disabled people's movement and on contemporary policy campaigns. We really need to raise awareness of the activism done by the incredible work of disabled trade unionists. I want to see a network of young disabled members, a space for activist development and advice, and I want the party to commit to funding access support at all of its events. Young Labour must, first and foremost, remain a compassionate and organised socialist movement, supporting disabled members in taking on positions of responsibility and nurturing them as trade unionists and activists. I believe together, alongside my comrades who I'm running with, that we can do that and that we can work for a socialist future.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I love the way you talk about it, and you know so much about a lot of the issues that disabled people are facing, and you're also like, I know you've represented them before, so I know that you can speak to people and that you know what people are facing and you know how to raise those issues as well. And I think hopefully when you're elected on Young Labour National Committee, that you'll be able to like really make some fantastic changes for disabled members. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass over to Abdullah now, who is standing to be our BAME officer on the Young Labour National Committee, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about why he wants you to vote for him. Thanks.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Aisha, to Belle as well. It's been great so far to listen to my comrades, and I'm proud to be standing alongside a great activist with a great track record. My name is Abdullah, as mentioned, and I'm standing to be Young Labour's BAME officer. So for me, really, I come from an area in Sheffield called Burngreve. And Burngreve is a very unique area. It's a multicultural area, but a strong community. It's a post-industrial inner city area in Sheffield, filled with many cultures, many faith, non-faith, and it's a community that everyone looks out for each other. But also Burngreve is a community where has been the forefront of some of the worst austerity cuts and the worst racist policies that this country has ever had. On the social front, our schools, our healthcare, our education centres, youth centres have all been cut, and our parks have been abandoned. And that is a legacy of Thatcherism, and also a legacy of the past Conservative government who have been in power for a majority of my life. And it's been a legacy of the coalition government who tripled tuition fees and abolished maintenance grant. And that has a legacy that's left me and many young people, majority of my friends as well, who cannot get jobs, who are trying to get into the housing ladder but are struggling, who are made to work in warehouses that pay really low wages, even with those who graduate, for corporations that make billions but don't pay any taxes. And our working rights are eroded. We're told that we shouldn't join a trade union, and sometimes people don't even know and think it's illegal to join a trade union. And if that wasn't bad enough, we're told that, you know, there isn't such thing as the climate crisis, which there is. But we need to have actions. And this is why many of us have been lately disappointed within the Labour movement. I joined in 2016. It's been just over 4 years since I joined. And I joined at a time when Black Lives Matter in 2016, we've had so a high number of cases. People, Black people were getting murdered. And we came out at that time, my friends and I, we were, at the time I was 19, friends of mine were 18, 17. We all came out and protested, and Sheffield's seen one of the biggest protests it ever has. So we came out to protest for Black Lives Matter. And for for myself, why does this relate to young Labour? Because a lot of young people of color, particularly young people of color, have come out as well because of their frustration. In 2020, last year, we've seen so many young people coming out campaigning and just had enough. And it was just not to do with just Black Lives Matter. It was to do with the fact that everyone's just tired of this austerity government. They had enough. And this is why we need to see a Labour movement that cares for its young people. And like Bell and my other comrades have said, we cannot take young people for granted. We've seen in Batley and Spen the treatment of the Muslim community due to a minority who have caused issues. But this is something that does not represent or reflect the rest of the Labour movement, and it's something that we have to challenge within the Labour Party. A few months ago was anniversary of Diane Abbott being one of the first Black MP in the House of Commons. But where is the Ford inquiry? Where is the leadership response in terms of the anti-Black racism demonstrated by the leaked reports and the experiences of many people within the Labour movement, the treatments that Black people and brown people are receiving? This is something that we have to challenge. We have to challenge this and address it. And this is why many people were inspired by the likes of Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Bell as well, and Zara Sultan as well, and many more who came out and spoke up and addressed these issues. These are the kind of things that young people want to see. But also we have to understand that it's not just speaking up and addressing these issues. Racism has been in our society for a very long time, but we must address as well the fact that young people do not have the right support given to them. Like I was not fortunate enough to have this free education. I had to pay tuition fee, and so many other comrades as well. It's something that needs to be challenged. It cannot be a dream. The NHS was once a dream, but it became a reality, and it's something that we need to challenge. But also what we need to do is we need to bring forward communities that are marginalized. We need to have intersectionality with our comrades. And when it comes to solidarity, it cannot be conditional solidarity. It needs to be unconditional solidarity. And we need unity. And when we say unity, we can't just be the North and the South divide. It has to come together. When we look at the people who are involved in labor positions, many of those are in those positions that many of them are based in London. We need to be reaching more to places in the North and further on as well. As BAME officer, what I would like to focus on, one of the things that I would like to focus on is support young people of color and work with other liberation groups as well to get them into elected positions, because we cannot talk about losing seats and how we lost seats, but yet when we look in terms of the representation and the diversity within people who are elected in councils and MP, just does not represent our constituencies. It does not represent our wards. And it's something that we must tackle. And I believe now more than ever, young Labour as a movement has to be taken seriously within the Labour movement, within the Labour Party. And it's so great to see MPs like Bell and Ian and many more who are engaged. But we need to see this all round within the Labour movement, within the Labour leadership. As a person of color, as a young Black Muslim man, I have seen and witnessed firsthand the racism. And lately, I have seen how Muslims in the community do not want to come to their CLP meetings. They do not want to go to their ward meetings because they're just going to be attacked for the few that let us down. But let's also be honest. This last election that happened in Batley and Spen has just confirmed how people are so open to be Islamophobic, to come out with their Islamophobia. And this is something that we must challenge. So as an individual, as a young Black Muslim man, once on the as BAME officer, what I would love to do is work alongside the National Committee and these lovely activists as well, comrades. So we have a young Labour that's not just talking about representation, but actually actively demands representation. We need change, and the change cannot happen until there is change within the Labour movement in terms of its leadership and supporting young Labour to progress. And it's something that I really hope that I can work with my comrades here. So please do get involved with our campaigns, do engage, and we look forward to continuing this campaign, and once elected, tackling issues of racism in our party.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. That was brilliant. You spoke so well, and I think you're such a fantastic organizer and activist, and I think you'll be an asset on the National Committee once hopefully you're elected. So thank you so much. Obviously, you've already heard a lot from me this evening anyway, but I'm going to obviously talk a little bit about why I'm standing as well and what I kind of want to achieve on committee. You see all the time how the party is dominated by a lot of men that will put themselves forward and try and achieve things both for and within the party and also for themselves. And sometimes I think this alienates a lot of women in the party, and especially young women. There are lots of things that the party leadership needs to be doing in terms of policy, from supporting trans rights openly to genuinely tackling sexual harassment and violence at the root cause, and to openly opposing the police crime sentencing and courts bill, which massively attacks rights to protest, as we saw around the time of sort of like Sarah Everard protests as well. What I want is for young women in the party to feel like it's a welcoming space for them, and that's for all young women, trans women and non-binary members as well. We can't keep bowing down to these transphobic trolls on Twitter that are in this sort of radical bubble of hatred, so much so that we have MPs actively involved in it and a leadership that is too afraid to say anything or to call it out. I would be proud to be part of a Young Labour National Committee that calls out transphobia when it sees it and demands answers. Demands answers from the party where it is failing young women, trans women, women of colour and other communities as well, where it has been recently. And then also there's this sense of sort of like imposter syndrome, which I know I felt and other young women also feel when it comes to getting involved in party structures. I know I've put myself forward for this election, and I hate to say it, it took an awful lot of reasoning within myself, telling myself that I'm good enough to do this. So the most practical thing that I'd want to do is to make Young Labour an accessible place for young women and all young members really. It needs to be somewhere where it's okay to say, you know, I haven't read this, or I don't know much about this topic or that topic, because there's no point in Young Labour existing if it isn't trying to reach out to young members and teach them, not just about socialism or about the theory behind what we believe, but also about organising in CLPs and communities and in unions. This isn't done through a load of different panel events. That's not how political education works or how it's effective. It needs to be a constant mix of like formal and informal sessions that can be interactive and encourage debate between members, not just a bunch of people who know what they're talking about, talking at you for a while. And then it's a question of like, who are our members? They're often concentrated in London and can be quite middle class dominated, but we have this huge wealth of young workers who are party members and are also trade unionists or tenancy activists who have this huge wealth of knowledge to share. We need our young women in the party to be getting involved in their unions, and we need to hear from women workers who are unionising and getting involved and moving within the trade union structures. There are so many young members in our party who aren't members of unions, but we should be reaching out to those who are in unions and to all other young workers in the hospitality sector or the service sector, because that's where the power is weaker. Young women are doing amazing things in their workplaces already, and we need to support other members to get involved, to stand as reps, as shop stewards in their workplaces, and learn about unions and the union movement. I was so lucky to be able to go to the Unite Political School in 2019 and to have been to the Durham Miners Gala multiple times in my life. And these experiences of union solidarity and education are so key for the future of our movement, and especially for young women that often aren't exposed to some of these experiences. Generally, there are other things I'm keen to support on the committee that are already underway. So pushing for a proper process for dealing with sexual harassment, and the creation of like a robust safeguarding policy for all of our young members, especially our members that are under 18. I currently work as a youth worker and have previously worked as a political organiser and organising within, and it's this kind of organising within our party, within our unions and our communities that we need to be challenging within Young Labour to truly fight for liberation. I think it's fair to say that in some ways the left are on a back footing within the party, and we do have our guard up in some ways, but we can't be insular. We need to be identifying new activists and keen activists to build them up and educate them. This is how we achieve liberation, through Young Labour, not through a simple representation of underrepresented people on the committee or girl boss feminism or anything like that, but through active organising and education of our members that is proactive and not reactive. And that's kind of what I hope to bring in terms of supporting young women on the committee to self-organise and to get involved and to stand for things in their party and in their unions. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass on to Ian, who's going to talk a little bit about the future of our movement and why young people are so important for the future of our movement. So I'll hand over to you now, Ian.
Grace, thank you very, very much. Listen, I've really enjoyed the contributions from yourself, Grace, from Aisha, Abdullah, Tor, and of course my good comrade and colleague in the Commons, Bill. You know, before we start, should we give a shout out to all the key workers, all the working people across the globe who are fighting for justice in the communities and in the workplace? And then let me just talk a little bit. What fantastic contributions. I'm not sure if I can add too much to what's already been said, by the way. But I don't want to say 2 or 3 things. Remember, it's not called the struggle for nothing. Remember, everything we ever want to try and achieve that the establishment is always trying to push back on, we'll have to fight for. And you can only fight with a united party, and you can only fight with people who have got the same type of values and the same vision for the future. You know what? I heard some remarks about where the Labour Party is at this moment in time. I've been a member of the Labour Party for 30 odd years. 30 odd years. That isn't a morning when I haven't woke up and thought, you know, why on earth are we not doing this? Why on earth are we actually doing that? And that isn't a morning where I haven't woken up, or have woken up, I should say, and said, this is what we should be doing. And then we look to try and change things. It isn't called the struggle for nothing. We need to change society, as Grace, Aisha, Abdullah, Tor, and Bale have all said. All differently, of course. All very much differently. But, you know, we've got to be up for the scrap. This is a fight. This is about social justice in this country. This isn't a game of dominoes. It isn't a game of darts. It isn't a bit of fun. It's so serious when you listen to the young people that have been on this call tonight, making their contributions. Listening to the detail of what they had to say was absolutely amazing. Fantastic. So serious. You know, when Grace was talking about women representation and the trade union movement and the need for trade union solidarity, the need for more political education. And then we had Tor speaking about what we need to do, what the Labour Party should be doing, how he feels that the Labour Party have left them behind. It's sections, Tor. It's sections of the party. And that's why we need people like yourself to continue to support the change which you meant. And remember, and I'll maybe mentioning this a number of times, the past we inherit to the future we build. The people who will build the future of the Labour Party and change society are the people that's been on this call tonight. Stay solid, stay brave, don't mourn, but organise. That's the crack. Aisha, what a wonderful saying that was, Aisha. So true when you say nothing about us without us. Isn't there too many people think they know everything about disabled people? There's people in the Commons, in the green bases, sitting on the green benches, haven't got the foggiest how disabled people are existing at this moment in time. And they're there making the decisions, many of them to the huge detriment of people who are disabled and who deserve much better. Many who are just existing in life and not living a luxury as many of these people might wish to see. And of course, Abdullah mentioned the racism. Abdullah, you're so right, comrade. You really are. The fact that in some of the workplaces, people are told that it's illegal to join a trade union. It's just amazing that these things continue to happen. But Abdullah, stay strong, stay in there. Your contribution was absolutely fantastic. I love the unity and the unconditional solidarity, because that's what we need within the trade union movement. That's what we need within the Labour Party. That's what we mean in our fantastic grassroots organisation. That's what we need in Momentum. You know, my youth, I cut my teeth during the miners' strike. When I was the same age as yourselves, on the picket line, getting battered by the police. Solidarity was there in abundance. The women against pit closures, fantastic. Women who had never been involved in the trade union movement, never been involved in politics, leading from the front. We experienced how a government can use the police and the army and the armed services against ordinary working people. We witnessed how the judicial system operates against ordinary working people in the workplace. State control by Thatcher. And we witnessed that. Now, as a young man, I've always been able to use prime examples. But I was speaking at a conference not so very many years ago, and I was talking about this. I was a young fella, asked a question. He says, Ian, it's fine. He says, I'm a member of Young Labour. He says, it's fine shouting and screaming about the miners' strike. He says, but I don't know anything about it. And you know what? That rocked me. It really did. I was one of these people who thinks everybody, young people, should know about the miners' strike, should know about what happened, should know about what I've just been talking about 2 minutes ago. But the sad reality is that isn't the case. And we really need the political education system within the party far, far greater than what it is. And of course, the trade union movement should play a massive role in that. The Labour Party is nothing without the trade union movement. Let me tell you that. We need more political education. We need community organising. I mean, Momentum was fantastic at community organising in the last election in 2019, and of course in 2017. We need to educate, we need to agitate, we need to organise, because there's never ever, ever been a need for young people to organise for a united left. They're the future. The people on this call are the future, and we need to make sure that systems are in place for this political education to excite people, give people hope, give people aspiration. You're the future, and we got to do more to support you, as has been said by the speakers. You know, we've got to keep this hope. We've got to continue to fight for a better future. Now, we didn't think that Jeremy Corbyn would be leader of the Labour Party when out like 2014. You'd never have thought in your wildest dreams that Corbyn would be the next leader of the Labour Party. You'd never think in your wildest dreams that we nearly have the keys to Downing Street in 2017 had it not been for people within our own party. We nearly got there. 3 years prior to that, we would never have dreamt of that. So we've got to keep this hope. We've got to keep campaigning. We've got to keep fighting the struggle. We'll get knocked down, of course we will. But what happens? You get back up again, dust yourself down, and keep fighting. And the young people of today, I'm telling you, I rely on you to keep this fight, keep these campaigns up against the Tories. How on earth anybody in communities like mine, for example, can support the Tory government for what they do is absolutely unbelievable. But you know, we nearly got there with Jeremy. We really, really did. I was so proud of what we nearly achieved. And it means something. It means that we can do it again. We cannot cry in our beer. We've got to fight for justice in the workplace. We've got to fight for a fair education system. We've got to fight for gender equality. We've got to fight for against these racist bigots, whether they're in society. We've got to fight against all of the things that people have been saying, what people have said on this call tonight. You know, people might think that there's nothing happening. Things are happening. You know, things are happening. You know, like only 2 weeks ago, Keir Starmer's full team was sacked, kicked out of office in Lotto. You wouldn't have thought that would have been the case. Only last week, the senior minister and the cabinet, you know, he got kicked out of office for, well, you know, what he did, an absolute disgrace to this government. And you've got a prime minister who didn't even want to sack him, if the truth be known. We've got to continue. Things are happening as we speak. You know, as Lenin famously said, nothing happens in decades, and decades happens in weeks. So we are experiencing changes, seismic silence at this moment of time. But, you know, I think it was Clement Attlee who said, events, dear boys, events. And quite simply what that means is, you know, whilst we're on this call tonight, we're not sure what might just happen in politics in the next week, the next few weeks, the next few months, but things will happen. Events, dear boy, events. So we need, colleagues, I'm going to wind up because I could speak for ages. I'm just going to say we cannot afford to mourn. We've got to organise, and young people need to be at the heart of the organisation within our party. We need to listen and learn from the young people within our party. We've got to build a fantastic structure within the party to support the young people, like the people that's been speaking tonight. We've got to be positive. We've got to provide a vision for the future. We've got to have some policies, you know. We've got to have some policies. We've got to be able to knock on people's doors and tell them what we stand for. And that's so important. So listen, colleagues, thank you very much. It's been excellent having the opportunity to speak to you tonight. And I think the ballot opens tomorrow. And I'm proud to support each of the candidates, Grace, Aisha, Abdullah, and Tor tonight. I'm supporting them for the election, of course. All the very best. Solidarity. I'll leave you with the words, I think it was, of Abdullah. Unity is strength. Unconditional solidarity is strength. All the very best, comrades. Solidarity.
Thank you so much, Ian. I think you've given us all a bit of an energy boost there as well, definitely in the campaign. Ready to go for when ballots open tomorrow. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining the call and speaking so highly of all of us. I'm sure we're really happy to have you. And we're definitely sort of ready and geared up for when ballots open tomorrow. So yes, to everyone listening, everyone who's a Young Labour member, you'll get an email. You won't get it tomorrow necessarily. You'll get it in sort of like the week after, sort of like within that week period. You just log in and you'll just cast your vote, and make sure to cast it for myself, Aisha, Tor, and Abdullah. Obviously, if you identify with any of our liberation groups. Thank you all so much for joining the call. Thank you to Ian and Belle for speaking so fantastically in support of the four of us. And thank you to my fellow candidates as well for talking about why they're standing.